Hello and welcome to the Path 11 podcast with your hosts, April and Mike. April is on assignment this week. For my guests, we are honored to have back Todd Acamesis. Now, Todd was on the show back in June on episode 10 and 11. And if you don't know who Todd is, I advise you to check out those episodes where he gives a good backstory of his life. In this episode, Todd explains what he's been up to since he's been on our podcast and some of the synchronicity walks he's been on and his hitchhiking adventures. Now, as a disclaimer, in the United States, hitchhiking is illegal in most states, so check with your local laws before you start hitchhiking.
I was reading something about this the other day, actually, an anomaly where like the Bernstein Bears. Have you heard anything about that phenomenon?
Yeah.
Sometimes, people feel like, people have died. And I've had a couple instances like that in my life where I thought somebody was dead who wasn't dead. And then, they were in a film again. I was like, I thought that person was dead. And, it is weird. I mean, even with the deep exploration work that, some of us do, there are things like that really do kind of stand out now and again when you do kind of look at it a little bit deeper with a bit more scrutiny.
Yeah. You want to talk about the Bernstein Bears at all?
I haven't really put myself enough out there to that what I've just that little soundbite's about much you're going to get from me, I think, because it was literally just something I read as an aside the other day when I was doing some research, and it kind of popped up on my radar briefly, and I just took a little look at it, and I couldn't remember because I know they were my favorite, sort of childhood storybooks, without a doubt, but I honestly couldn't remember if it was Bernstein or Bernstein or whatever, and so to me it was just curiosity because they were my favorite storybooks, but beyond that, I didn't really dabble too much into it, so sorry about that.
No,
but I promise we've got lots of the good stuff to talk about.
You're officially the first returning guest, so
I was very honored by that. I noticed that, and I was really honored, so thanks.
Yeah, no, we like talking to you. Our biggest response from your first show was that the synchronicity walk and just going out in the town and, either by yourself or with a group of people and just rolling dice and seeing where the synchronicity goes. How many times have you done that since the last show?
We've done a few synchronicity walks since our last podcast here in London. We've inspired a bunch of people from around the world to do their own, which was phenomenal. And, people from individuals asking, would this work just one person? Groups asking, would it work in, tiny little towns and villages and hamlets? And, all the way up to, big groups. So, it was quite a phenomenal response. And I'm quite honored to be back on the show to talk more about synchronicity. And I'm very, very keen to share some of the latest experiences that we had because they've led to some really deep insights. And I think this is the thing I love about, synchronicity, manifestation, or, going to workshops, on any sort of subject, because ultimately I find that when we go to workshops or we read books on areas that we're already familiar enough with, we're deepening our knowledge. We're sort of really allowing that knowledge to sink in to the point to where we start to see how it dovetails together and we get to a point of wisdom. So we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm really quite excited. And I guess if I just catch people up who might hear this for the first time, with regards to what we do, I would typically, living in London, I regularly organize what we call synchronicity walks for demonstrating the raw power of synchronicity to what I would call the uninitiated. It doesn't really have to be people who already believe in this stuff. I'm more eager to explore with people who have never experienced this stuff. They might even call themselves a skeptic. So what I would typically do, I'd advertise the walks in the windows in London's alternative cafes, bookshops, spiritual hangouts. I'd just put something as simply as the date, time, location, and a simple little advert, something along the lines of take a spontaneous walk across London with your subconscious as your guide. Be open to having your path nudged at just the right moments to experience synchronicities. And it always gets a good turnout. I think, the average walk size we have is about 20 people. We've had up to 100 people on a walk, which was really quite cool to experience. That volume of people walking across London as a group. Several people sort of fell through the cracks of reality, which is interesting in itself because you can't always keep track of everybody. But no matter what, they would have enjoyed probably their own solo synchronicity walk. But what would typically happen is people would show up on the day at the time designated and at the location chosen. And I just very quickly explain there's no real formal plan to the walk. There are only 5 basic guidelines to following, to follow. One would be we have dice, so we roll dice at all the crossroads that we get to. If it's four different directions you can go, if we have 2 dice, then we would nominate. If we go left, that would be 1 through 3 on the roll of the dice. Obviously, you can't just roll a 1 on 2 dice, but there you go. And then for another direction, we'd nominate 4 through 6, and so on. And then we roll the dice, and if it came up something like a 6, then we'd go in the direction that we nominated for 6. And this way, we let go of all need to control the direction, which helps us get into a real state of non-resistance, which I think really gets us deep down that rabbit hole of consciousness, and to where we can start to experience realities within realities. The other guidelines. We let go of any need to control the outcome. We trust our intuition, and I ask people, to really deeply trust to the point where they're not second guessing their first instinct, because I find that first instinct is usually the right one, usually the one that is from that voice, that inner guidance system. Whereas sometimes if we hesitate, doubt comes in, and then we hear our ego talking, and that can sometimes lead us in a completely different direction. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the wrong direction. It's just a different direction. And then, one of the final sort of bits of guidance I'd suggest people, it's a matter of being open to experiencing synchronicities. So, this is the basics of what, this idea. And on the previous talk, I shared some of the examples of what happens when on these walks and people really courageously trust to follow the guidance. And if you're happy for me to share an experience at this time, I'll go straight into it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So on a beginning of each walk, what we'd typically do is we'd first nominate 2 people to hold the dice, so 1 each, and that just helps to let go of that controlling element that little bit more, just to make sure one person's not manipulating the direction, even unconsciously. So 2 people are holding the dice, and they roll the dice at the very beginning so we can get a group number for the night. So we get our group number, and the idea behind that number is, we then use it to sort of follow the signs throughout the night based on that number. So, for example, on this night, at the start of the walk, we rolled the dice, and we got the group number, which was the number 2. And, so after getting deep into the experience, after many rolls of the dice, and we were maybe 30 minutes or more into the walk where we'd already had a lot of back-to-back synchronicities, we came to this one point which is really of note. We have other mechanisms for getting really lost into this, totally immersed into it. So there's no element of control. We're just completely in the flow. And somebody had an umbrella with them. And so I asked this woman to come forward into the middle of the group and to close her eyes, point the umbrella outwards like an arrow, and then to spin like a top. And the idea was she would then spin with her eyes closed until intuition came in and sort of nudged her to stop. And whichever direction the umbrella would be pointing, that's the direction we'd go. So she did this, and she started to spin around and around and around. And within the moment she stopped, and she's pointing the umbrella, she opens her eyes, and she's pointing the umbrella sort of diagonally across this London Square, this big London Square, and we can see there's an exit on the other side of the square. There's a road, And so we thought, okay, fine, we'll follow this, and the idea is that when we're giving information like this, we have to follow it. We have to really trust that inner guidance system, kind of like your GPS or a sat nav, as we call it over here in the UK, in your car. You don't put in the sort of address into your GPS and then suddenly decide when it tells you to go left, oh no, I don't think that's the right way, and you go straight. We trust it. And so it's the same with that inner guidance system. The universe is, I find, very self-organizing, very sort of correcting. So at any point, if we get off our path, if we just trust it enough, that inner GPS, that inner sat nav will get us back on track. So as she's pointing this umbrella diagonally across the square in the direction that Synchronicity wants us to go, this guy suddenly, a businessman, comes out of this building, just strides out of this building as if he's got great purpose, really moving with speed. And he's heading in the exact direction the umbrella is pointing. So I said to the group, okay, follow him. And so, there was about, I guess, 20 or so of us on this walk, and we're all following behind this guy. He wasn't aware that we were following him, and it would have been curious if he would have learned that we were, because that can always take it a little bit, into another direction. But we followed him, and we followed him to a point where we got to a crossroads in London known as Regent Street and Oxford Street. And we have our subway system, which we call the Underground. So he went down into the Underground to catch a train. And so, we energetically thanked him for unknowingly taking, part in our walk. And, at that point, we decided, okay, what else is here? Let's now look for our group number again, the number 2, to see if we can recalibrate once again, like the GPS. So once again, our group number was number 2. And the moment I said to everyone, start looking for the number 2, we have, all kinds of weirdly named buses that go through London with, kind of numbers as well as letters. And this bus drove by that said, it was perfectly timed. It said C2. So it was the letter C and the number 2. And so I was saying to people, okay, well, obviously, the universe wants us to see the number 2, which again is our group number. So let's really pay attention. So we looked around to see any occurrences of the number 2, but nothing was obvious until one of the women in the group spots 2 ladies just standing talking to one another on their own. And, they were just strangers. They weren't part of our group. So I decided, okay, yeah, why not? So the 20 of us sort of walked over and surrounded them, and I quickly said to him, look, I'm sorry, pardon the interruption. We're not tourists. We just wanted to find out if you'd assist us for a brief moment. I explained we're on the Synchronicity walk. We're going along across London, experiencing occurrences of synchronicity, which are meaningful coincidences. I said, we don't want to go to any touristy destinations. Can you just sort of intuitively, without thinking about it, just point us in a direction, and then we're going to follow that direction? And so she did that. And I thought, like most people will, she might put some thought into it. And I thought she might choose one of the 4 major, roads that lead from the intersection. But she pointed to this sort of alleyway that was a little bit further along. And I thought, oh, okay, that could be interesting. So we thanked them. We crossed the road. And when we got over to the alleyway, on the building right next to the entrance of this alleyway was the number 222. So now we're getting these number clusters. It's really, again, we took it out of our hands completely. We asked a complete stranger to guide us along our path. So we had no involvement in that except for asking them to take part. And she chooses this corner where we have this occurrence of 222, and she had no idea our group number was number 2. So that was quite special. So as we're standing there looking at the number of the building 222 and, really gobsmacked, and our jaws are already dropped open with this, this wonder, this guy comes zooming out of a shop, one of the high street shops, one of the major, retail outlets on that road, and he goes running down the alleyway. And then literally a few seconds later, these security guards come chasing after him. So obviously he was a shoplifter, and these security guards are chasing him, and they all run right past our building with, the 222 on it. So I said to the group, follow them. So we all now start sort of breaking out in stride, and we're following, this shoplifter and these two security guards. And, it's these sort of spontaneous moments that really allow us to let go of any unconscious control we might be using to influence the walk, which helps us get, even deeper down that rabbit hole. So, what we did was we followed them for as far as we could, but a few people in the group really couldn't keep up based on their physicality. So we eventually sort of, again, energetically thanked our unsuspecting shoplifter and security guards that briefly served us as white rabbits to get us further down that rabbit hole. So, I think at this point it might be a good place to just mention that these sort of the people that were on the walk that were a little bit older, maybe couldn't quite keep up at the stride that we were trying to keep up with the security guards. They served an important role, because let's say that when they're slowing us down and we can't keep up, maybe somebody in the group, somebody else who's a little bit impatient with the people that are lagging behind, it really serves them as a reminder that in that moment not to take yourself too serious. If you're taking yourself too serious, you're not in that state of non-resistance, which is an amazing state to be in to experience this stuff, because otherwise, through our overly controlling stuff, we can miss a lot of good stuff that's going on. So, once again, remaining in that state of non-resistance, you really let go of and let your inner guidance system recalibrate your journey along the way. So I wasn't worried that, we weren't meant to keep up with these people. We just took it over from there. So once again, it's trusting that GPS, that inner sat nav. The universe really is self-organizing. It's self-correcting, and which means you're willing to surrender that control. You're feeling if you're feeling lost in life, as an example, your inner guidance system will get you back on the path, that will help you find a new one. It's just to take a moment to let this really sink in, because if you can really learn to deeply trust your inner guidance by having that courage to take any actions you're being shown to take by synchronicity, you're always going to find ways to fulfill your life's purpose, which for everyone, I feel, is fundamentally the same. Ultimately, I don't see purpose as something we find or something I see it more as something, we are. The ego will have us believe our purpose is something separate from somehow or something outside of us. And fundamentally, I think, who we are is love. So, if we all have the same purpose, to love and be love, to be the light that transforms the darkness, wherever we are, in whatever way we can, just don't allow the ego to make us think this is not a worthy purpose, to be loving. So, these walks literally can bring out all this stuff and really be these powerful insights, where people can see how even their ego is getting in the way. The ego, which, to me, this is not who we are, will make us, always think this can't be the path. There's something else that's more special. I just know it. So we spend our whole life sort of not being who we are in order to satisfy the ego's search for that one special purpose. And if you've had a few signposts emerge, then to me, like on these walks, cultivating a mindset of non-resistance is really necessary for faithfully exploring that path associated with all these signs. So like on this night when we're getting all these signs to follow or to suddenly stop because there's people that can't keep up, that's part of the signs too. We have to really deeply trust that that's part of it, and that once again, that inner sat nav will take over and it will keep us on track. But it's having the courage to really deeply feel that. So to me, that then leads us on to this idea that essentially there's just one or maybe two systems of thought. One is a thought system of love, one is a thought system of fear. And in that moment, if somebody is there once again having this fear that somebody's slowing us down and we're going to lose the trail, the scent of the trail, we have a choice in that moment. We have a choice to choose between those two thought systems. If you think with love, when a signpost appears, you're more likely to walk that path, with courage by trusting your inner guidance and taking the accompanying inspired actions. However, think with fear, and habituated behaviors of old will just take over as your guidance system. And if that happens, it pays to remember, you're not exclusively of this world. That always really helps me. We're not just human. There's a part of us that, at least in my belief system, in my way of thinking, my philosophy, there's something of us that's outside of this world, that has that bigger perspective, that bigger picture of our life. And recalibration can easily occur by just giving that task over from the ego to that true self. Because, like I already said, the universe is self-organizing and self-correcting. So to me, it's just, trust it. Will steer you back to your intended path as easily as your car's GPS. Recalibrates your journey plan when, we accidentally take the wrong turn. But, I think I've taken a big segue here, so I'll just finish off this little story. So the average time we spend on a synchronicity walk is about an hour and a half for most occasions, and that seems to really work out well. And on this particular walk, it was coming down to the last 5 minutes, and we were suddenly guided into an alleyway that turned out to be a dead end, which seemed to be an instant disappointment to people, because they had this thought of finishing the walk in a dead end. It was a big anticlimax after all the back-to-back synchronicities. But I reminded people to once again, to remain in that state of non-resistance and search around for any sort of sign the universe might have there to show us that we're in the right place at the right time. And I also shared the idea with them about the trickster aspect of synchronicity, because this is something people will experience regularly. This trickster aspect is there to remind us not to take ourselves or life too seriously, because ultimately synchronicity is not a human consciousness. It's not human consciousness. It's non-human consciousness. It doesn't play by human rules. It doesn't play by our illusions of lack and limitation. So I said to people, look, search around, see if you can find our number, look for a newspaper on the ground. If you find one, turn to page 2 and see what, see what might be there for us. So as people are looking around, I suddenly noticed there's an entrance to an apartment building in that alley, and it just became obvious. There was a buzzer for the number 2 apartment. So I called everybody over and I said, look, this is an occurrence of number 2 right here. And everybody, suddenly it was that, that sort of socially acceptable, collective cultural trance was kicking in. People suddenly became very inanimate, almost, fearful that, we can't invade somebody's privacy. We can't push that button. And so I just took the lead and I pushed the button. And then like 10 seconds later, this voice comes over the intercom, says hello. And I explained to him, I said, hi, we're doing this walk across London. We're not tourists. We're just sort of having a bit of fun and experiencing meaningful coincidences that lead us from one point to another. And it led us to your door. And it went silent for a few seconds. And then the guy came back on the intercom and he said, well, come on up. And it was just, so spontaneous. The guy, for his part, he didn't have, it almost like it whatever he was doing or whatever level of the cultural trance he might have normally been in, this just was like a state breaker, and he buzzed us in, and everybody's, I'm holding the door open for everybody, and everybody's going up to this guy's apartment. And then this last guy who wasn't part of our group was coming in the building at the same time, someone who lived there, a resident of the building. And he asked me what we're all doing, and I explained that, what we'd just been doing, and we buzzed this guy's door, and we're going up to meet him. And the guy was like, oh, wow. He goes, I've lived here for 2 weeks now, and I haven't met any of my neighbors yet. And I said, well, then this is an opportunity. Come up with us, And we get up to this guy's apartment, and he opens the door, and he's holding a baby, and his wife's standing behind him. She's holding a baby. And they just had these warm, inviting smiles on their faces, and they welcomed us into their home. There was, the 20 of us plus this other neighbor who now had this perfectly timed moment to meet a neighbor in his building that for 2 weeks he hadn't been able to meet before, because, sometimes we can be very closed down human beings, and we don't, sort of put our energy out there too much, especially in big cities. I think we can find it to where we restrict ourselves so much out of, this social conditioning of fear of other people and fear of other people's beliefs and fear of other people's ways of life. But here we are now, all these people with, this deeper connection beyond all that, cultural conditioning, feeling that deeper connection, that true sort of self. And we had a fantastic evening with them. They made us cups of tea, and they had sort of snacks that they shared with us, and we shared our story for the night, and neighbors met neighbors. And it was just absolutely, the deepest magic that you can experience, just purely because we followed our inner guidance and we trusted, and we had the courage to take the actions that we were being shown to take. So it was just really special.
How did they take the story that you told them about following the two, with the lady on the umbrella to the shoplifter? How did they take that?
Well, I think in really good spirits and with great curiosity. Even the neighbor who came through the door at the same time of us, who'd been living there for 2 weeks, I think when people hear this stuff, at first there might be that skepticism, but when they, at some point when you start to discuss the deep stuff that, yeah, okay, fine. Synchronicity, it's meaningful coincidence, and it's meaningful to the observer. So, they hadn't observed much of it except for that very last occurrence of synchronicity. You think about it. The guy, for example, the neighbor who came in the door at the same time of us, if we'd gone a different direction, or if we'd been there 5 minutes later, there's a possibility he would have never been introduced to his neighbors. So, I think sometimes people can see that profoundness, and it can really, really touch them and make them think in a deeper way and start to see that, reality isn't what it first appears on the surface. And I think this is the thing that we need to do. We need to learn to, look beyond the surface, to see these realities within realities, which are always there, which, would take me to one of the stories that I talked about on that night while we were in this apartment with, these new friends, just to give them another insight as to what, we're experiencing with these, like I said, realities within realities. It's kind of like Captain Cook that went, navigating the globe with one of these tall European sailing ships. And it's reported in his log that when they got to some of the South Sea islands, some of the islanders, when Captain Cook, sort of, if you like, anchored at sea, the big tall sailing ship, and then his men got into the small rowing boats and started rowing towards shore, it suddenly, some of the indigenous peoples on those islands were very frightened all of a sudden, because they just sort of saw these rowboats come out of nowhere, because they had what I would term belief system blindness. Their current beliefs, they didn't have anything within it, such as a big, tall European sailing ship. All they had was these small canoes. And, their small canoes were the in comparison, the same size or similar size to the rowboats that the Europeans were using to come to shore. So, of course, they could see that because that was within their belief system structure. But, it's reported that they were in shock that, these boats just seemed to come out of nowhere. They couldn't see the tall sailing ship that was anchored out to sea because, again, they had this sort of negative hallucination. It just wasn't part of their belief systems. So, the sort of reporting goes on that within that, those sort of experiences that, the Europeans would communicate with the shaman of the tribe. And the shaman was usually the first to be able to see the ship, the tall ship, because, let's be frank, that's the shaman's job, is to be open to mystical experiences, to see those realities within realities. And once he was able to do so, because, the other members of his community put so much trust in him, he was able to then help them experience what was equally in front of their eyes. So, with using stories like this to help people understand that, even simple things such as when they have the belief that they laid their car keys down somewhere and now they can't find them, and they have that belief, but I laid them right there on the table, and they're not willing to see beyond that table. They search their house maybe 2 or 3 times and can't find the keys. And then eventually when they do, they remember, oh, yes, of course I put them there, but they were right under their nose the whole time, but they were being blinded by a particular belief system. So to me, these synchronicity walks really have this very special, sort of way of opening people up, like, this great cosmic can opener that just opens their mind back almost to a point to, their true nature, which I feel that is our true nature, to be open-minded explorers. I think sometimes people get, they get too skeptical, and that gets in the way. And skepticism is fine, but it's a personal, sets of bias, and that will create, limits to what people experience.
Now, the people in the group, you spent a few hours with them. Did you see any change in them after the walk?
The change that you witness in people, is very transparent. I've had people that have literally had to sit down after an occurrence of, not just back-to-back synchronicity, but back-to-back-to-back-to-back synchronicity, to the point to where any skepticism, this is why I say in some of my talks, I agree with people like Tom Campbell. The sign of a true explorer is someone with an open-minded skepticism. And to that, I would add, you need to have a good sense of humor, because when your belief systems of a lifetime, when your cultural sort of trance, you're suddenly being given a suggestion to wake up, from your trance, because I can assure you, there's nobody out there beyond you that is really capable of waking oneself up. It has to come from within. So, when people have these direct experiences of synchronicity and it revealing itself to seem to be something that is beyond, physical reality, something that seems to have their interest at heart, something that seems to be lovingly nudging them and looking after them, and being able to see this bigger picture of their life, that is a profound spiritual experience. And like I said, sometimes people have to sit down. Equally, in the beginning, it can go the other direction. Sometimes people look at me as the leader of the walk. They might think I'm reading too much into stuff, but maybe what they're not understanding at that early stage of their new awareness of synchronicity, that synchronicities, where does it start? Where does it stop? If this is interconnected consciousness, this is just one big, ride of synchronicity. And to me, you have another phenomena that goes hand in hand with that, which is manifestation. And I think, at first, if you're only just opening a little bit to this, then you'll only see, a little bit based on your new ability to, what you're calibrated to. And I think that's just it. The nervous system, we have to, on a daily basis, to, especially in our sort of spiritual awakenings, just because we start to awakening to deeper phenomena of self, the true nature of reality, doesn't mean that we stop. Because any beliefs that we're now going to pick up along the way will serve us for a period of time, but then it's time once again to challenge even those beliefs to make sure they don't become ingrained and concrete, ways of thinking. So, we have to recalibrate every now and again. And I think, a great way to do that is through meditation. I even suggest to people on the walk, as part of the counseling, if you like, that I have to sometimes give to people when their worlds do, start to get shattered right in front of them through their own direct experiences, to say to them, look, meditate on it. Maybe for the next few days, ask the universe, ask your guides, ask your higher self, your soul, whatever it is, put whatever label, applies, the force. I don't mind what label they put, and just ask that, that non-human consciousness, or that non-physical consciousness, to, show you more, This is something I'm regularly do. I would use gratitude, but I'd say, like when experiences like this happen, I would say thank you, followed up by more, please, because I don't want it to stop. I want it to continue, and I'm under no illusion of lack mentality whatsoever. So I know there's plenty for everybody. Consciousness isn't limited. So, once again, synchronicity does not play by human rules. So I think, we do, in order to better understand these things, to deepen our awareness, to get the deeper meaning, we do have to recalibrate our nervous systems, which ultimately, is our psychic antenna to be able to, download new information, to be able to see realities within realities. Even when we start, waking up to a deeper level, there's always going to be another plateau. There's always another level of experience.
I wanted to ask too about, and I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, no pun intended, but and you kind of brought up fear a little bit. Do you ever get in a situation where some people won't go down a certain road because, I know somebody that got mugged over there, or I know it's a bad neighborhood, or something like that? Because I'm thinking, if I do that right in my immediate neighborhood, I'm in a pretty good neighborhood, within like a 3-block radius. But if I go to that 4th block, I know that the police are, usually there, patrolling, every Friday and Saturday night. And there's, that environment that could be potentially dangerous. Do you ever encounter something like that with these walks?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's kind of along the lines of what I was talking about earlier. If you start, once again, thinking with the habituated fear, that we have inside of us, we get equally habituated behaviors of old that will take over as your guidance system. And, when that starts to happen, recalibration once again occurs. The GPS, the sat nav starts to recalibrate your journey plan. And at that point, if people's fear are too great, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast, sometimes people slip through the crack of reality, which basically means they turn around and walk the other way. And, we don't see them anymore for the rest of that night, which is absolutely fine. I will say to people at the very beginning of the walk, you can bow out at any point. Sometimes some of the synchronistic shenanigans that we get up to, can really, take people right to the edge of their comfort zones. But to be honest, Neo would have experienced in the Matrix when he's in the car under the bridge and it's raining, and they want to take him to Morpheus, and he's nervous and he wants out, and they open the door and someone says to him, where that road leads, Neo. You've been down that road many times. So to me, at some point, we have to sort of the reason we look away, if you like, the reason we don't want to go down certain roads, is because, that fear, and that fear that we've never really worked with. Most of the time that fear is just in the background. It's just like background noise, and it's just enough to stop us from doing new stuff. And I think, in those moments, we have to sort of remember that, if there is a bigger part of consciousness, if there's a part of us outside of physical reality, the answer is not always to look away. We look away because we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do next. We say to ourselves things like, if there's conflict taking place in the world that we see on the news, we say, well, how can I, one person, make a difference? And so we usually look away, and we're looking away in fear because we don't know what to do as one person. But to me, that's no longer the answer, especially in today's world, where there is so much going on, and there are, our brothers and sisters around the world that need us to start showing up. We need to start showing up for ourselves, and we need to start showing up for other people. So, it's in those moments to where, when suddenly you feel like looking away once again, because, you're feeling overwhelmed, because you don't really know what to do, the new way, once again, should be recalibrating that nervous system, sort of conditioning that psychic antenna, and ask for guidance, ask for what can I do? point me in the right direction. Show me which search terms to use in Google. I'm willing to see this. I'm willing to see this in a deeper and more meaningful way. And that's part of the equation. That's part of the answer for moving beyond this stuff. But yeah, to answer your question, these walks can bring out people's deeper fears. But when that happens, you have to trust that people are for one, they're going to do what feels right for them. But hopefully in that moment, through a lot of the sort of comfort that they're getting from the group dynamic, that will help them hold steady. It'll help them hold their course and trust that, as a group we can do it, because too many people are just taking these very lonely journeys, not feeling very connected at all, feeling very closed down. And this is another thing about these walks that I love so much, is it's a way to connect people and help people really, feel that interconnectedness that we talk about in spirituality, and ultimately feel loved.
That's really good. As you're talking about that, I kind of got thinking about Wayne Dyer. Are you familiar with his work?
Yeah.
And he just passed away a couple weeks ago. And it kind of reminds me of right after he passed away, Hay House started releasing a couple films for free for a few days. And I was able to catch the one where he was working at that camp. I can't remember the name of the movie. And he had the film crew around him. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't catch that.
Okay. And the way you're talking is very similar to the way he put that information out there in the film, where you just kind of like let go and just let the universe kind of guide you. And of course they wrote a story around it where it worked, and and it's also interesting to hear that. I also think too that this is kind of how I think probably Jesus, walked around when he was here.
Oh yeah, you'd have been on a constant synchronicity walk.
And I mean, I don't want to go too far down a tangent here, but it's this is kind of how the great spiritual teachers in the past have lived, and just letting the ego go, and just what happens, and just, and to quote Tom Campbell, I think he said this: the point of life is that stuff happens and you got to deal with it. I'm kind of taking that out of context, but that's kind of the same idea here, is just to let go and just follow the synchronicity, just deal with what comes to you.
I absolutely agree, and I think this comes down to ultimately learning to be 100% responsible for our experience of life, and in that entails understanding that we're ultimately living in two worlds. We don't have to leave our bodies to have a sort of experience of parallel reality. We have two parallel worlds that coexist right here on Earth. One of them is the world of love. The other is a world of fear. One of these realities is very real. The other one is an absolute illusion. With loving thoughts, we experience who and what we really are. And oppositely, with fearful thoughts, we experience the false world of the ego, which, you're alluding to now. And, we all have wounds that keep us attached, if you like, to this world, to relationships, to jobs, to situations. These are, illusions of this false world of ego. But, ultimately, to me, the way to really heal this stuff, to really work through this, ego, this false self, is by being who and what you really are right now. This is literally the highest form of healing your wounds and transcending into this one true reality, is being who and what you are right now. Because in the moment, the ego can't be here with us. The present is an egoless state. So, this is one reason why the ego is constantly battling, to bring our sort of awareness back to, the past, or to project us into the future, because it cannot reside here in the moment with us. So, this is a powerful part of the process of this deeper awakening. And once again, I think, these synchronicity walks, just really do have that ability to show people that even on the walks at any given moment, you have a choice to either, sort of walk in that one true world of love, or to walk in that, that false world of ego. And, this is what we all do, in our everyday lives. We're walking that line between those two realities. And we always have choice, no matter how little the choice may seem, with our perception at any given moment based on our state of consciousness. We do ultimately always have choice, but getting to that point of having that taking that 100% responsibility for our experience in life, that's a challenging thing. That's even at being at 99% responsible. Just that one outstanding 1% is enough to keep us stuck in an old pattern. So, and it's typically, I find, it's the little things that are tripping us up. Most of us are being very responsible. We're waking up to our responsibility as citizens within this world, our responsibilities in our own lives, and the interconnectedness that we share. Because even with things such as, if we have conflict in our everyday life, if there are people that we're in conflict with, if in spiritual sort of philosophy we believe in interconnected reality, then every single thought that we're having is having a profound impact on, if you like, the idea of the metaphor, the hologram as a whole. The smallest change in the hologram is going to affect the whole hologram. So, I think to get to that point to where we are being as responsible as we can be for every thought, for every feeling, for every, behavior, this starts to be that change in the world that, we all talk about. We just have to learn to get rid of all, these, as much as possible, these very limiting beliefs that even we find within spiritual circles. Because, one thing we have to be aware of is that the ego is really clever. I mean, it's clever to the point to where everything you learn in any new system, so if you're learning a new system of spirituality, it is learning what you're learning in that moment. It's learning too. So it then finds, oh, wow, look, this is a new way that I can create, I can use these ideas to further my existence, because the ego is always about self-preservation. So if it can find new tools to preserve itself, to preserve its separation, its sense of separation, which creates pain and suffering, it will. This is why sometimes we have the danger in spiritual circles when people, start to feel that they're having a shift in their reality, they're having a shift in vibration, and they get to that sudden, the point to where the ego uses that as a means to to say, okay, I can't be around people of a lower vibration anymore. That's not loving. That's not being spiritual. That's the ego. The ego, finds ways to literally masquerade, fear as love. For example, we've all had it. Somebody might pull us aside and say, I just have to be honest with you. No. They're not about to be honest. They're about to be mean. That's, once again, that's the way the ego masquerades, fear as love. And it's those tricky little things because, it gets all these new tools and ways to hide behind. So, we have to really be aware, very self-aware as we go through this reawakening, that, every single thing that we're learning will literally equally be used against us by the ego to preserve its own reality, to preserve its identity.
Yeah, very well said. I'm thinking, do you want to talk about the next walk?
Yeah,
Okay.
Actually, what I'd like to go on to is a recent. I always ask myself this question: how far can I take this stuff? So we've recently, if you don't mind me just with a quick little, self-interest plug, we've we've developed, because of the last podcast that we did with you, and we had such an outpouring of people wanting to know how can they run their own synchronicity walks? How can they take part? They know I'm in London, but they'd want to do one of their own in Amsterdam or New York. And so, people are asking for guidelines on how to do this stuff. So we've developed a new website called synchronicitywalk.com, which is, this sort of global platform, especially created for people to come together, and share in this deep magic of synchronicity. This website has, all the resources necessary for people to connect with other like-minded explorers for the purpose of organizing synchronicity walks in their own towns, cities, anywhere in the world. We're using some really amazing technology like Google Maps apps that allow people to sort of like put a pin marker in the map and for their town or their city to let other people know they're interested in either hosting a walk or joining a walk. So for anyone sort of interested in hosting their own walk, we literally have information on the site that can support them, a downloadable PDF guide, which tells them how to plan, organize, promote, and successfully lead their very own synchronicity walk. And for anyone who's more inclined, just to take part in a walk as a participant, but if there's not currently a synchronicity walk being promoted in their location, they can, take a pen marker and place it somewhere on this global map, letting other people know, their interest in joining a walk, which someone else eventually will come along and host. So, we really want to support people in being able to do this themselves. There's no charge for, them hosting walks. All the information there is there to support them. So, it's free for them to put up a walk. It's free for them to join a walk. Now, we're going to ask, people who host the walks as much as possible, if they are going to charge, maybe just charge like I do sometimes in London, just to sometimes cover the materials, a couple pounds per person or a couple dollars per person, which is fair because, whoever does eventually lead one of these walks, their time should be valued. So, if that's all right, just to mention that. So in this sort of quest, if you like, to find out, how far can we take this concept of synchronicity walks, which, like I said, has this ability to open people up like a cosmic can opener, opening our minds, our hearts to, higher quality ways of thinking and feeling and being. Can we experience the same weird and wonderful quirks of reality that manifest during the walks in other ways in our lives? The first time we talked, I shared some examples of taking this concept on the road through my synchronicity hitchhiking trips, where, I'm able to experience all the exotic phenomena I would typically experience in a synchronicity walk. All these amazing synchronicities, these revelations of connections, maybe meeting a friend of a friend, on the road, which really to me, shows there's no limits to applying these ideas, in our everyday lives. And for me, the really exciting thing I find about following, this breadcrumb trail of synchronicity, is all the deep insights that get revealed along the road of life. As an example, I recently went on one of my annual hitchhiking trips, synchronicity hitchhiking journeys, where I just pack a small backpack, I take my passport and my sense of adventure. I really keep it minimalist as possible. And on occasion, I'll even, my bank card, maybe I'll just take a, debit card and I'll just put something like the equivalent of $100 in it. And I might be out for 2 weeks. And I know that's all the money I have available to me. So I have to really, trust that everything is going to work out. I have to really trust the guidance, get into that, that real deep state of non-resistance. So, so on this latest trip, I plan to be on the road for a minimum of 2 weeks. But as it usually happens, once again, synchronicity, like I said, doesn't play by our human rules. And, synchronicity has something more in store for me beyond, my personal limits and expectations, which I'm cool about now. Not always so much on the road, because even for me, this is always, it's constantly pushing my own comfort zones. And sometimes I'm not in the mood to have my comfort zone's pushed. I don't want anybody out there to think, he's mastered this stuff. It's fine for him to do this stuff, but I can't do it because blah, blah, blah. No, I haven't mastered this stuff. I'm still learning. I'm still a baby in consciousness, and I'm happily so. So as part of my usual preparations for these journeys, I make myself some off the wall, wacky, crazy sort of, hitchhiking signs. So say, for example, if I'm hitchhiking like I used to when I lived in America as a teenager, I'd hitchhike from Tampa, Florida, maybe up to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. I would hold up a sign that would say Washington, D.C. And that way, the idea is that, you would get somebody picking you up that's going further along the road than somebody that's just local traffic. So instead of getting maybe 50 lifts over a period of a few days, you're maybe hopefully getting 1 or 2 long haul rides, and that helps you get, to your destination, but, faster to your destination. But the point here behind these journeys, these synchronicity hitchhiking journeys, I'm not, there's, like I said, there's no destination. There's no need to arrive at a certain time. So therefore, the signs that I use aren't destination signs as such. They're a little bit more sort of just supposed to be playful. So for example, I had 3 signs on this trip. So I got a bit of cardboard and some big markers, and I wrote out my signs. One of them said astral planes. Okay, not a lot of people out there are going to know what that means, but on motorways and highways, when they see the sign, they're not going to know what it is, so they're going to keep driving. Oh, I can't help this guy. But part of the idea here is that I don't want to just have anybody pick me up, who just wants to talk about football for 2 or 3 hours. I want to be able to talk about something deeper, something more meaningful that really could make a difference to both of us or whoever's in the car. It could be more than 2 people. So the second sign I had simply read, abduct me, which I thought, was a little bit more risque, but, I'm up for it. And then my final hitchhiking sign for this journey, are you dreaming or awake? Pick me up for a reality check. So, I took my 3 signs and I went off and stood on the highway, on the motorway, as we call it here in the UK. And the very first person that picked me up was a woman who worked for the Ministry of Defense, so the MOD. And the conversation, from the very beginning, you could tell was very stiff. She'd just come from work, and I think she was still in that sort of MOD cultural trance. So every level of society, there's a different level of this cultural trance. And of course, within the military, there's a different culture there than the culture of civilian life. So already, although she picked me up, there's still, we have our personal boundaries. So there was that sort of stiffness in the beginning. And then it got to a point where I can't even remember how we got on the topic, but she was quite Christian, and she started talking about gay rights, and it was something that deeply upset her. In the sense that she didn't, believe in gay marriage, and she therefore didn't feel they should have the right to get married. And, that's not stuff that, I don't share those beliefs, but, I was sort of in that frame of mind, something that is sometimes a real challenge, to remember. But, we have to be careful, how we think about other people's spiritual journeys, because whether they believe they are spiritual or not, it doesn't mean they're not on a spiritual journey. And we need to remember, not to view their journey from a spiritually sort of superior perspective, just because, they are not on the path, which, that we're on. It doesn't make their path irrelevant. So you have to sort of, be in this space, to where, once again, that 100% responsibility, not hanging out at like 97% or 98%, but, really, 100% responsible, because every person we come into contact with, we're kind of weirdly taught in relationships, that, we each have 50%, responsibility for that relationship. But what happens on the day when one of the 2 people or more people in, bigger dynamics of relationships, what happens when they're having a bad day? What happens when, they're just really feeling down and low? And, and not very loved. That's the moment where if we don't stick at 100% responsibility for ourselves and for that relationship dynamic, then we too will get triggered. And what started off as somebody else's stuff, we make it about us. Whereas we should, just allow it to be their stuff and let it be about them. But we're all too quick in our culture to react to other people's stuff as if it's something we need to take personally. So I let the woman have her opinion. I wasn't going to force mine on her. I just thought, what I could do instead, maybe I could use humor. And so, I simply said, when she was talking about the gay rights stuff, I said, yeah, that's interesting. I said, I guess looking at it from a Christian perspective, I look at something like the 10 Commandments, I said to her, and I said, I don't remember there being a commandment that says, thou shalt not be gay. And, she kind of shot me this, little look. And I said to her, I guess the closest thing that, that comes to that might be, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's oxen. And, that suddenly got a giggle from her. And she had a little, we had a little bit of a giggle together. And it was almost just enough to get her to maybe, start letting go of that religious, sort of conditioning, that religious trance that, hey, we're all humans here, and ultimately, regardless of, our enculturalization, which can be useful, it can be useful. It has its uses. There's no doubt about that. But, it can equally be, some of these things that, we don't challenge some of the thinking, which can actually be dangerous for an entire culture. And it's these things that, we really need to be aware of and be on our toes about. But, anyhow, so we're having this conversation. She's lightening up a little bit, and we start talking about, social activism. And she then states very seriously, she says, people take love too literally. And she was talking about, sort of hippie types in particular. And I sort of sarcastically quipped back, yeah, the goal of some people to actually be loving. Which again got her to lighten up and think, wait a second, what did I just say? Did I just say, people can be too literal with their love, and it really made her see what she was saying. Because again, if we're in this deep trance state, sometimes we say things that, moments later or days later, we think, did I really say that? Oh my God. So that's how the conversation went. And, this woman, literally, this was amazing. She pretty much took me near enough to where we live. We live in an area outside of London called Bedford. And it's probably an hour's drive from London. I had my partner drop me off closer to London because of the direction I needed to go, which was over to Wales, because the first part of my hitchhiking trip was going to involve only being one day on the road before I was going to give a workshop on, other exotic states of consciousness like lucid dreaming and out-of-body exploration. And so my partner dropped me off at a place which was, easy to get that lift straight over to Wales because, there was a timing that was important to be there for the next morning to give the workshop. So, and then after that workshop, I would be on the open road for 2 weeks and then, no destinations. I could just have a lot of fun. So this woman picked me up and she wound up being, she was going all the way to Wales and she took me all the way, to where I thought I needed to be and dropped me off. And I thanked her. And I thought about it, and I thought about the conversation, and I thought about how deep and such a special journey that was, and I hope that it was special for her too. And then I called up the organizer who was putting me up for the night accommodation wise, and she said, "Oh, you've gone 20 miles too far on the highway, on the motorway," and she said, "Would you like me to come and get you?" And I could tell it. From what the tonality of her voice, it was probably going to be a little bit of an inconvenience. And I said to her, without hesitation, I was like, no, it's absolutely fine. This is what I do. I love hitchhiking and I know I'll get a lift and I'll be there soon. And so I got off the phone and I walked over to the opposite side of the motorway and put my thumb up. And the moment I put my thumb up, it didn't take long at all. This van pulls over and I could see the driver and the passenger as they're coming towards me and pulling over. And, instantly I started, evoking, there was deep fears within me from my own cultural sort of conditioning, from the West. These were two Muslim men. And so suddenly my deep conditioning of, Muslims, some Muslims, radical Muslims being terrorists. And in some way in my mind, suddenly I saw these two men as, they're in this higher van and I was like, whoa, I don't, it just came out of the blue. It was obviously a part of me that, really needed some attention here because, that was not very loving thoughts whatsoever. So, these are the type of things like, the question you asked me near the middle of this conversation with regards to how do some people react on these walks sometimes with regards to fear. I'm now putting myself out here on the open road with people that I don't know them and they don't know me. And society has trained us to be fearful of other, people's beliefs and other people's ways of living. So, you're going to encounter that. So my fear came out. Now, to add to it, this Muslim man, the passenger, then jumps out of the van before it even stops. That makes him look a little militant. And that in itself, was disturbing to this part of my psyche, which obviously, was getting its guard up. And this man, he opens the side door of the van, and you can see there was a partition wall between the driver and passenger compartment and the back of the van, and it was a wood paneled sort of paneling, so where you couldn't see into the driver's area. So instantly, this part of me once again was like reacting, thinking, "I'm not going in the back of this van," But in the end, this guy was just making space for me to put my bags, but I was being triggered. And this is in those moments where we have to learn to self-soothe ourselves because, in this, sort of experience of life, that we need to start taking 100% responsibility for, when we start getting triggered like this, it's a good idea to have some tools to be able to, to help us, calm down. And in that moment for me, I used some self-soothing techniques, and I was okay. And the guy got it back in the van into the middle of there was 3 sort of seats in the front. So he got in the middle, and I sat towards the passenger's window. And within just less than 10 seconds being in the van, suddenly the passenger announced to me, he goes, "Please don't stab me." and the driver quipped in very quickly, "Yes, if you're going to stab somebody, you never stab the driver. That's bad for everybody." And we all started laughing, and it instantly started to disarm, each of us, because in that moment, there's this realization that, all of us are experiencing fear, but none of that fear was, valid enough reason to stop loving each other. That was not a valid enough reason to not be kind towards one another. So, it was a very, very powerful moment, and I'm sure they felt it too. And we all started laughing because here I am, a Westerner, an American at that, living in Britain, and they could tell my accent straight away. They knew where I was from. If many of your listeners are thinking, "Oh, he's not American," I've been here 22 years in the United Kingdom, so it's taken its toll on my accent, and I have been anglicized a bit, but they could tell. And, they had their own sort of fears that were coming up. This is a Westerner. This is from the U.S. We didn't know we were picking up a Westerner from the U.S. So, you had no idea what was going through their minds. But literally within a short space of time from those little bit of joking and playfulness, we were able to go deeper with each other. We were able to go, beyond the places where we typically get stuck, where we get stuck in that fear. We were able to transcend deeper. And before the end of the lift, which, by the way, they went out of their way. They literally dropped me off at the organizer's house. And before the journey ended, they were sharing some deep spiritual insights from their culture that didn't sound any different from the basic tenets within my spiritual conditioning. And it was just a beautiful all-around experience. So, this is, yes, our stuff is going to come up in the ordinary living of, experiencing life. But once again, it's learning to take that responsibility to that level, like I said, of 100%. Because, if the passenger really was, that fearful, and I just did things to confirm his fears, that wouldn't have gone down well for any of us. We wouldn't have been able to talk, along the lines that we did. We wouldn't have been able to share, our cultural insights with each other, to see that there was commonality, which is very important, because, this is the danger of cultural trends. We get into this sort of, we have this shared belief system, and that our belief system is the correct belief system, and that other cultures are wrong. And that is the real danger of this stuff. And not realizing that there are other, belief systems based on reality, that make reality. So it was important for all of us in that moment, to be able to see that we shared commonalities, and that we could relax, and we could now discuss other ideas that, and we just seemed, by the end of the short, trip that car journey we shared together, it was like 3 long lost friends from a past lifetime being briefly reunited. And it was really powerful, really quite special. I then did the workshop the following day. And then, the day after that, I was back on the road again. And the organizer who hosted me for the night, she dropped me off at this motorway services. I haven't lived in America for so long, but whatever the highway, side places where people stop to take toilet breaks, bathroom breaks, she dropped me in one of these places, and I got out my very sort of special dice. I've got really interesting dice that I use, for specifically calibrating my hitchhiking journey and letting go of the control. So I have 2 type of dice. I have one dice which is a die that I use for actually choosing one of the 3 signs. So if there's 6 numbers on the dice, 1 through 2 would be for astral planes, 3 for 4 would be abduct me, 5 and 6 would be are you dreaming or awake, pick me up for a reality check. And the second die I have is called a kindness dice, and it tells me what to do. So there could be on the dice, it would say something like, give somebody a gift. It just has symbols, and you have to, there's a little description that comes with them, a little key. So there's one that's give somebody a gift, one gives somebody a compliment, another, smile at people. So I rolled the dice as I'm standing there in this motorway services, and I rolled the dice for abduct me, for the sign for abduct me. So I was like, oh, okay, I haven't used that one yet. And I rolled the kindness dice, and I got smile at people, and I was thinking, oh wow, this is going to go down well. Standing on the side of the road with an abduct me sign with this big broad smile on my face. And so I wound up standing there. Typically, it will take me, on average, maybe 10 to 15 minutes to get a lift. Usually no longer than that. Sometimes when it's longer than that, it could be for various reasons. It could be, a poor traffic area where there's not much traffic coming through. There was plenty of traffic, so there was nothing out of the ordinary, let's put it that way. I wound up being there on the roadside for a total of 5 hours. And again, this was highly unusual, and I just knew that I had to remain in this state of non-resistance, because I'd had other experiences previously that showed me that if I stay in non-resistance and I just stay in that flow, what is probably happening behind the scenes is one heck of an orchestrated ride. Maybe the driver for this particular ride is not on the road yet. Maybe they've been delayed, and I have to just roll with it. Otherwise the ego comes in, you start having doubts, you start doubting yourself, you start, thinking, okay, I need to do something else, I need to change the signs or whatever it is. You just go with the flow. So I went into sort of plan B, and I just took out a book and I sat down next to my sign and I started reading. And the moment I did that, this guy pulls over, picks me up, and he asked me where I'm going. And, I didn't want to freak him out, saying, oh, where are you going? Because I had nowhere in particular to be, because this is now I'm on the open road and I can go anywhere. I've got my passport, I've got my dice. It doesn't matter where I go. I'm just there to, experience reality and to see realities within realities and have a really fun playful experience. So I said to the guy, I've been here for a few hours now, so I don't mind which direction you're going. To be honest, I'll take a lift and you can drop me somewhere. So I got in the car, and it was really interesting. He asked me where I lived, and my partner had only recently moved to Bedford from London, and I'd been living in London for 22 years, and I instinctively just said, "Oh, London," and he said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to a place called Bedford," and I was like, "What?" and so I said to him, I said, "Actually, that's where I've just moved to recently. I've lived there for a few months now, so yeah, I live in Bedford." And he was like, "Oh, great. Well, look at this. You get a lift all the way from Wales all the way home, which was like a 3.5-hour trip to go all the way back to there. One lift, and I waited for it for 5 hours. But, I had to explain to the guy. I said, okay, well, actually, no, I'm not going back home at this moment. I'm on the open road. I'm doing this thing called a synchronicity, hitchhiking trip where I roll dice and I do this and I have to follow the signs of synchronicity." And then he was like, "Oh, okay, well, that makes sense." And I then said to him, "Yeah, but I've only been on the road a few days so far, but my partner is already really missing me, and she keeps sending me SMS text messages to say, I'm missing you. I hope synchronicity brings you home to me soon." And I told this to the guy, and he was like, "Okay." Suddenly, he became this agent of synchronicity, and he was like, "Okay, so let me get this straight. So your partner is really missing you and sending you messages saying, I hope synchronicity brings you home soon. And here I come and pick you up, and I'm going all the way to Bedford, and you want to go somewhere else." And suddenly I was presented with this challenge. If I am in true resistance, then I follow, the trail of synchronicity. I follow the signs, which basically means right there, this guy is the sign. The guy he said to me, he goes, "Look, you could go anywhere else like you're planning to, but, this might be one of those signs you're talking about. You could go home and you'll be home in 3.5 hours and you can surprise your partner and then you can get back on the road again tomorrow." And I was like, who is this guy? He's really, really deeply getting this. And so I thought, you know what? Yes, I have to get into that and stay in this non-resistance. And so, I said, fine, let's go to Bedford. Let's see where this goes. And so now this 3.5-hour lift, a few minutes more into the conversation, when we do the socially acceptable "what do you do for a living" sort of thing, questions, he reveals that he works for military intelligence. And, right off the bat, he started talking, some very hard-line stuff. Things, for example, about Edward Snowden, the individual who, released a bunch of classified documents, who is now, on the run in Russia. He's like the number one enemy of the U.S. State at the moment. So he starts talking about Edward Snowden in a way which I found not very human. I found to be once again that military cultural trance, where they have that status quo that they can't challenge and they're deeply sort of indoctrinated into, and it gets to the point when cultural trance is that deep, where people become almost inanimate objects almost. They toe that party line. They don't challenge the beliefs that they've been programmed with for a lifetime. And so I said something to him when he mentioned something about Snowden, what Snowden did, and I said something about the equivalent of what sometimes our governments do. Like, say, I used, for example, the example of the Iraq War. Using the idea of weapons of mass destruction to get us into the war, and then finding out those actually wound up being lies by the intelligence community to get us into that region. And he kind of paused and he thought about that, and then he turned around and I won't mention what he said because it won't be fair to him, but he said something that suddenly was a complete reversal of his ideas and beliefs, which made me think, oh my God, wow. He basically mentioned a head of state in particular who he thought, was a war criminal. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay, well, I'm sure you don't share that in the cafeteria at the, military headquarters. But it's once again, because I was being human, because I was using humor, because I was, just holding a space instead of just saying to him, look, no, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. You're not right. I'm right. you're wrong. If there's a big, if this was a game show and there's a big buzzer, you'd be wrong. That's just going to get people's backs up. So simply by being human towards one another, we both started moving into this, this new dynamic. And, once again, I was just mindful, being careful that, this guy's on his own spiritual journey, and his is just as, relevant as mine, just purely because, it's currently he's at a different phase in his development doesn't make it any less so. So we started to talk, and over the period of about an hour, he became more animated and more animated and more animated, as we talked, to the level of animation where, it was more that natural levels of being once again, beyond that normalized social conditioning. His trance was slowly being lifted, through loving, compassionate, kind, conversation. And it really, if you like, guided him back to being human once again, and not just being this entranced robot, which, sometimes we can become if we're we're not willing to challenge, these sort of collective belief systems that maybe at one point served, to protect, maybe hundreds of years ago, when there was chaos. But now, we have to look at our world in a different way. We're a community, and this is the only world we've got. I'm a believer in multidimensional reality, but that's no excuse to say, hey, well, if we screw this up, then we'll just go back to the astral planes. That's not loving thinking. That's not the type of thinking that we need. For like Einstein would suggest. We keep attacking, each other and beating each other with at the level of effect, and not using that higher level of thinking that Einstein talks about that is actually going to solve our problems. So, it was a very profound conversation once again. And, by the end of it, when he dropped me off, it was almost like this guy had transformed in to reveal himself as some great spiritual master. That's how deep it went. And everything was there inside of him already. He just had to be in the right space to where he could feel he wasn't going to be judged, where he could feel that he was going to be loved regardless of, the things that he said. And this is what I find, once again, the ego thing. Sometimes people, the ego will use, something like, our own agenda to mask it as, something loving when ultimately it's just a way to be mean to each other. And we just had a human conversation in the end, and it was really quite special once again. So my hitchhiking trip, pretty much, when I got back and he dropped me off, we live on a houseboat on the river in Bedford, and my partner saw me walking up the road, and she just came out, and she, classic movie sort of moment, running towards me and threw herself into me. And, it was beautiful. And I had the option to go on the road again. But then, there was a series of things when I got back, which suddenly made me think, okay, there's some stuff to be done here. Suddenly things have come up, but it was all perfectly timed. And, there was a part of me that was sort of screaming out, it's not fair. It's not fair. I was meant to be 2 weeks on the road experiencing deep synchronicity and reality at its best. And now I'm back already, and it just began. And, part of me was thinking, I needed quantity, but the quality of those 3 hitchhiking lifts that I got were so powerful. It was enough. It really was enough. I mean, again, the ego will tell us it's never enough. We're not good enough. Other people aren't good enough, blah, 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 blah. But it was enough. It was enough.
Do you think when you were stuck on the road for 5 hours waiting for a ride and you had the abduct me sign?
Yes.
Do you think maybe if you had a different sign, you probably would have been a little more relaxed with it initially?
There is that. You could ask that, yes, and that would be a valid question. But it's one of those things where I was also sort of watching people as they were driving by, but it almost as if people weren't even looking. It was almost as if I was invisible. They weren't even really looking at the sign. Whereas typically, I'm 6'5", you can't miss me. But yet it almost just seemed as if I had a cloaking device on. And it's one of those things where you'd have to really be there to really evaluate the situation. But to me, from my perspective, it almost seemed like I was being obscured from being seen because this one lift was the lift I was meant to get. And because I really, have practiced this, for such a long time, and, I have a lot of, belief or faith, whatever you'd like to call it, in this way of living my life, I got this reward, and that reward was this what could have been a very challenging conversation, because equally that was pushing a lot of my own personal buttons, because I come from a military family, and I was that classic black sheep within the family. I was always ostracized for being different. I was always ridiculed, marginalized, you name it. And that he pushed a lot of buttons in the very beginning of the conversation, and it really showed me that what I had learned over the years, that I was strong enough as a human being to practice what I was learning. But that's just it. It was because it wasn't just something I was intellectualizing. I was actually practicing this stuff. I was applying what I believed, what I learned. And that took me from that place of this being something just intellectual, to being something that, changed my actual behavior. It enhanced my consciousness. I've become a little bit more emotionally intelligent than I used to be. And all of these things have served me. And I really do feel that, part of that particular hitchhiking trip, being picked up by that particular individual, was partly a healing experience for me, because of all that repressed anger that I had as a child, as a teenager, and even as an adult, where, sometimes my family still look at me and think, what an oddball. Why didn't this guy just get it? Why didn't he just get a normal job? And to have this conversation with this person who, if, the conversation had gone another way, because we both got triggered and got our defenses up and started, saying, no, you're wrong, I'm right, and started blaming each other, it would have been something entirely different. And we would have just been in sort of victim mode, both of us probably in the end, or one in an aggressor mode, one in a victim mode. But in the end, it was a human conversation, and both of us got to get beyond our conditionings, got to be able to be human again, to be animated again. And yeah, I think actually, in that case, I think I actually had an invisible cloak on that I wasn't aware of. But you are right. I mean, sometimes it can be that way, because obviously body language alone, nonverbal communication, can account for more than 80% of all communication. So, if I was uncomfortable about the sign, that could have obviously translated to people driving by, and not just in the nonverbal sense of my body language, but equally in the sense that if this is interconnected consciousness, every thought that I put out there on the airwave is going to impact, those who I come into contact with, or those who I'm in contact with. And, this is possibly even an area to lead into a whole new sort of line of observation and discussion. There was a out-of-body experience I had recently where I wound up on another dimension of reality, which was immediately adjacent to this one. So, vibrationally not too distant from here, not quite the astral plane proper, but, somewhere in those intermediate sort of territories. And the environment I encountered, I was there and I was, having a discussion with some of the individuals there. They knew I was not from that place. They could tell that. And suddenly these rather large, alarming hailstones started pelting us from the sky. And then these individuals looked at me with this sort of negativity and this with a bit of, I guess, resentment. And I sort of intuited it, because, when you're in the out-of-body state of consciousness, you can more readily, tap into, the airwaves telepathically. And what I was picking up from them was that they were really angry at me, because those hailstones were actually emanating, was their environment was being sort of, if you like, manipulated because of all the uncontrolled human thought and emotion that was emanating from our physical world. And it was literally showing up, impacting their weather systems within their adjacent reality. this is interconnected consciousness, and this is a powerful demonstration of, why we need to be more responsible just for, our own backyard. We literally are unconsciously having an impact on environments beyond our physical realm, beyond our physical world. And it was upsetting, communities and on other levels. And again, this wasn't the astral plane proper. This was an intermediate environment between, our physical earth plane and the astral planes, what we'd call, the astral planes, the afterlife state, the interlife state, whatever label people like to use. And, and I just felt, the energy of negativity that was being focused back from their environment back to our environment, that would have then impacted us. Even if it was just, having an effect on our weather systems, if it was having an effect on us emotionally, this is, again, an illustration of this need, I think, that we all, have to really, be more open, to be able to be in a position to where we're more open human beings. We're in a society that allows us to be more open again, because there are so many of us are just so closed down, so overwhelmed with, with what's going on in life and not feeling any support. And, this was just, like I said, an example of how we share emotional airwaves, not just on this level of reality, but between other levels.
The stories are just so interesting, and the walks, even the hitchhiking. It's each story that you tell would make like a really good movie, and it's I don't know. I just find it fascinating and freeing, and it's kind of like an inspiration just to hear it. And the walks, I just want to as soon as possible get out and start putting up signs and try and doing the same thing.
Well, like I said, we're looking forward to supporting people with, with the new website, synchronicitywalk.com. And, it's, to me, it's just one of these areas where, if people can start validating, that more that people, are intellectually understand, but to have that direct experience, it really starts to make that deeper shift. It has that deeper ability to have that deeper shift within people. And, this is just a great way to validate that, that reality is more than what it seems. Synchronicity has that ability to really, sort of ground us into the moment and remind us that there is this underlying energy to our everyday lives. And, for people to literally go from intellectualizing this to have direct experiences of it, like I said very early on, these are profound spiritual experiences that come from this sort of, living life this way, being willing to have these experiences, and the reward is the validation that comes from it. It's, to me, it's, a parallel is the validation that comes from shared out-of-body experiences. I've had so many shared out-of-body experiences with, people that I've trained over the years, with my own family. My son, who's, 16 years old, I trained him from when he was 8 years old to have experiences. And like most children, at that age, they're naturals. They're absolute naturals. But to be able to find ways to validate that, we are not just these physical beings. We are here having this amazing human experience, and to be present in this reality, to have an in-body experience, of high quality. This is something that I think we all do aspire to, but, the high quality comes from having an open heart and an open mind. The low quality experiences come when our minds start to close and our hearts start to close. And I think, that's why this validation is so important, whether, of that more of who we are. And, again, things like synchronicity, things like shared out-of-body experiences, shared dream states, many other ways that people can seek, sort of validation of their spiritual nature, the true nature of, of reality.
Do you hear any stories from other people that do your synchronicity walks? Do you get any feedback from walks that you're not going on, but from people that maybe follow you on Facebook or something?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's a good question, and yes, I get feedback regularly from people who do take the plunge, and their experiences, when they really trust there's one thing that I think is important for people to understand about synchronicity. Synchronicity is not a process. It is something that happens in an instant. And if you are able to, your fears, your own limitations, of lack, again, synchronicity is not human consciousness. Therefore, it doesn't operate by human rules. It is always there. So, if we can start to see beyond the idea that this is a process that has to happen, no, this is something that happens in an instant. It just is always there. It's as if it's it's an everyday sort of reality, but at the same time, it's not. It's a reality within reality for those who are not in a position to experience it through whatever belief they currently have that stands in the way of that. But it is something that can happen in an instant, and I think the exact same thing holds true for manifestation. You can apply as many processes to it as you want, but parallel realities, in my sort of experience of reality, is there. It's real. To me, it's real, and there's a version of you that is experiencing so many different things. We're not just these, single beings in a single body, in a single world, in a single universe. We have parallel versions of ourselves that are experiencing a lot of different stuff. And, at any given moment, we're capable of aligning ourselves with those other aspects of self and experiencing that stuff in the moment. But it's, once again, we can suggest there's processes if that really helps the ego mind, if that really helps that part of, our mind that has become to a state of lack and need to see, that sort of linear moving from A to B. I understand that. I get that. But that is not these exotic states of consciousness. They're not limited in those ways. But, just to make sure I've answered your question, the feedback I get from people, like I said, if they follow that process, of, just letting go, if that be the only process, just to literally follow those simple guidelines, which, they can make up their own guidelines. They don't have to have any guidelines. They can just, put themselves out there and see what happens. But most people will report back to me that, they had life-changing moments. Not just sometimes, what's really quite interesting when we have a designated time, we usually wait around 15 minutes for everybody to arrive, and then we have to get going at some point. I'll then get a call maybe 10 more minutes into the walk that somebody showed up to the meeting point and we're now gone. And I say to them, well, we're here at this intersection. If you can make your way there, you can meet us. And if you don't meet us, then enjoy your own synchronicity walk, your own private synchronicity walk. And when that happens, people report back to me like the next day with an email, saying, wow, I just trusted that I could have, my own private experience with synchronicity, and I had the most amazing time. I found places of London that I've never been to before. I spoke to strangers for the first time, and this happened and that happened. And it literally it's a total life changer. They're saying that, they're sitting there at work sending this email and looking around them as if they've just woken up from the Matrix.
Is there anything you want to add, or?
Well, if you don't mind me just making one little plug.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to mention to everybody that we had an idea. My business partner and I, we have a business together, which we mentioned on the last show, Pandora Star. We've actually decided we want to give people around the world the opportunity to experience this light. And so we've come up with an idea where we want to have people, we're going to have this program where we're going to send one Pandora Star, deep trance meditation, light machine, whatever you want to call it, around the world. We're literally, we're going to have a whole string of people who are going to have it in their home for up to 3 days at a time. And then they're going to pay Pandora Star forward. There's like a pay it forward system where they're going to just send it to the next person in the chain. And we want this light to just go absolutely everywhere. Every country it can go, touching people's lives, showing them, what can be done, with the light that they can do themselves without the light. Everything they experience on the light, they can experience without the light. It's just a matter of, increasing, the quality of their practice, their daily meditation practice, sure, the light can give them a powerful psychedelic experience, but we want them to realize that this stuff can take place without those machines, without the technology. The technology is great. It can help us get from A to B faster, but to really help people reveal to them things, because sometimes people are on the light and they have experiences that once again just change something, shift something instantly, and it's enough for them to then sort of get back into a practice or apply more quality to their practice. So we'd like people to be aware that if they'd like to take part in this, we're literally going to send this device around the world. You can host it in your home for 3 days. You can have all your friends go on it. Take it. We're even sending it out with a portable battery pack where you can take it out in the woods. You can take it to the Statue of Liberty. You can take it to Red Square in Russia. Out in the outback in Australia, anywhere, and you can have 6 continuous hours of use. So you can get anybody you come across to have a go on it. And it's just we'd love people to just take part in this and help us get this light out there to see the world. So if I can just sort of plug that, that's we'll be putting that up at pandorastar.co.uk.
All right, very good. Now you just have one that's going out?
Well, we've had an overwhelming sort of outpouring of people from the UK, so we're probably going to send a second one out to just the UK. We've had such a response from our home country. But we've had a good 50 people from around the world already. So if they're all hosting it for 3 days plus travel time, we're probably looking at a good 200 plus days so far that the light will be on the road. And to be very honest, if it stays on the road for the next few years, the next decade, we won't mind.
Yeah. You should probably do something where you can, like everybody's on, are you on Instagram or Twitter?
We just recently set up a Twitter account, which we'll put up on the site, because we're not entirely sure if we're going to keep the account we've created or whether we're going to create something else. So, but we'll put that up on the website. And even yourself, Mike, if you'd like to be part of that chain and have Pandora Star come to your neck of the woods, then we'll put you down on the list.
All right, yeah, definitely. I'm sure April will be into that too.
Cool.
And I was thinking, if everybody, when they get it for their 3 days, and say they are out in the woods or they're, in a city somewhere, they could take a picture with it and then, hashtag it, just so you kind of have, like an online album of like every location it's been at and, the fans that have been using it. And
oh, absolutely. I mean, this is part of the plan. Definitely. We want everybody's stories. We want your pictures. We want your videos. We want everybody to be able to share in this. And so, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, that sounds very cool. I'll definitely have to try that out.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks, Todd. I know we're over the 2-hour mark already, and we had some minor difficulties in the beginning, but the stories were always amazing. I always like listening to your stories and adventures, and we're gonna have to do our own here pretty soon.
Well, if you do, please let me know how you get on.
Yeah, definitely will. And we always want to have you back every few months just to keep us updated on your walks and the Pandora Star, see where that's traveling to around the world. And
well, I appreciate that. It's an honor to be back on your show, and I really look forward to somewhere down the road where we can connect again.
If you'd like more information about our films or to purchase our DVDs, you can head on over to our website at thepastseries.com. They're also available to purchase on amazon.com.
Our films are also streaming online at vimeo.com, gaiamtv.com, and iTunes.
If you have a show suggestion or would like us to interview someone specifically, please feel free to shoot us an email at info@thepastseries.com or send us a tweet at thepastseries.
Please rate and review us in iTunes and subscribe.
We hope you enjoyed the show.